G'day, Andrew Murray here from the Apartment Specialist, talking about how much commission is charged when selling an apartment. Now this is a very important question because it's not always just about the sales price, because what's really important for an owner is what you are left with after all the expenses, i.e. after all the costs, and commission being one of the major ones. It's very important to know what you're going to be charged for selling an apartment. Now, an apartment is quite different from houses. It demands a lot more expertise and knowledge of the area. Each building is like its own suburb, I suppose. And when coming to sell apartments, there is a standard commission that most of the agencies charge, and it slightly differs, but it's basically 4% of the sales price up to $500,000, and then 2% after that, and then 1% over $1 million. And that is plus GST. But if you're overseas, you do not have to pay GST if you can prove you're a resident. So remember that, because some agencies do still charge GST. Now, the other part with selling apartments is there are a lot of apartments that are sold for very low values. Now, this is generally because they're very small apartments, or they may be leasehold apartments, or you have obviously leaky apartments. So this is when the values are going below that sort of $300,000 mark. And this is when a minimum fee is charged. So across the board, all the agencies charge a minimum fee. So that's the minimum fee charged for selling your apartment. Now this ranges from City Sales being $12,500 plus GST, to Ray White being $11,500 plus GST, us being $11,500 plus GST, then Bailey's being $11,500 plus GST, and then Barfoot's being the cheapest, being $8,500 plus GST. Now all of these can slightly differ, but that's basically the main players in the market. And that gives you a good idea of basically what you're going to be charged when selling an apartment. Now, there's also marketing fees to take into account, which I'll go through in another podcast. But the important thing for you is it's not always just about commission. It's about what's important to you in an agent, or what's the most important thing. And so when I put myself in an owner's shoes, what's important to me is maximising the amount of money in my pocket, getting the highest price after all expenses. So that's when looking for a person to engage to sell your apartment. It's not just about the commission, it's actually about results. And that's what's fantastic about the apartment market. In the housing market, you cannot compare sales results. For example, if you walk down a street of houses in Auckland, they're all very different. So if you sold if you sold a house and then another one sold next door, those two houses couldn't be compared, because one may have a tennis court, one may have a swimming pool, one may have a larger piece of land, a different kind of house, etc., etc. But with apartments, in most cases, you'll have multiple apartments exactly the same area and footprint of the apartment next door or above or below. Which means with apartments you can actually prove who's getting the highest prices or who's getting the lowest prices. So one thing I suggest you do is when you're looking at an agent to represent you, ask them for all of their sales, like their last maybe 50, 100, 200 sales, and not just their best ones, but all of them and where they ranked in the building, i.e. how high were they, how many record prices have they achieved. And that'll give you a good idea, because you can save $1,000 or $2,000 on the commission. But if you're going to get an extra $20,000 or $30,000 through going through a different agent, well, it's a bit of a no-brainer, and I know what decision I'd be making. But anyway, that's up to you. And this podcast was more about educating you on the commission charged in New Zealand and in Auckland for selling an apartment. And I hope this helps. Andrew Murray, Apartment Specialists. Cheers.